why don't we introduce Mr. R.A. Salvatore, talking about his newest book, The Companions. I don't plan on putting any spoilers beyond like stuff in the beginning of the book, because beginning of the book is hard not to spoil. So
my favorite line in the book, maybe my favorite line ever in the Drizzt book, is "My name is not Rukia." Yeah.
So I guess we're gonna we'll start off. So welcome to the show, Mr. Salvatore. Do you want us to call it? What would you want me to call you? R.A. Salvatore, Mr. Salvatore,
How about Bob? Just
Bob. Okay, Bob works. So welcome to the show, Bob. So we're here today to talk about The Companions, your newest book featuring Drizzt Do'Urden. So why don't you first tell us a little bit about The Companions?
Well, this book really goes hand in hand with the last 5 books. Drizzt has gone through quite a bit through the Neverwinter Saga, and particularly at the end of the last Threshold. And this is really a book about, how can I say this? It's a book about, I think the dedication says it all in the book, right? It's a book for people who believe that doing the right thing is its own reward. And
so I guess based on that, then what influenced this book is a very different book than the other books.
Yes.
It's different in style and different in feel, and I won't go into the spoilers, but it feels very different. It's a very different type of book. So what influenced you to create this type of story? What was the driving force? Because this book feels very much like it was a passion project. Feels very much like it was something that was gnawing on you that you had to get out, and it feels like a passion project. It feels like a work of love. So what influenced you for this story?
Sure. This book, I planned this book out when I heard about the change to 4th edition. So that was like 6 or 7 years ago. And I knew that 4th edition was going to do a lot of things that were going to force me into a lot of directions that I won't say I didn't want to go there, because that's not fair. Forced me into a lot of directions that were going to put me way outside my comfort zone. And I also suspected way back then that there'd be a 5th edition coming in short order. And I was right on that. I didn't think it would be this quick. And honestly, I thought this would be the last Forgotten Realms novel I ever wrote. But circumstance within the world kind of forced my hand early on it. And I'm glad it did, because you say passion project, absolutely. I couldn't stop writing when I sat down to do this one.
And honestly, as far as my end goes, I read the first 4 Drizzt series. I got to about 1,000 orcs, and then by then college and high school caught up to me, and I was like, I ran out of time. And this one made me go back. Now I'm going back to my friends' libraries and getting all those books that I missed, because this one made me really want to go back there, because it captured me from what some listeners say is series fatigue, where you just have so much with one character.
Absolutely.
So now this made me want to go back, because it's a great book.
I thank you. I absolutely understand series fatigue. I mean, it's 25 years we've been doing this. That's a lot of years. And people's go through all kinds of changes in lives, and sometimes they're into fantasy, other times they're not. Sometimes they need something different, so people, and that's why if you look at the Drizzt books, I've really done them so that you can pick up almost any one of them and read it and have fun, whether or not you've read the ones before. There are very few Drizzt books that you'll be missing a lot if you haven't read anything before. I think the emotional impact gets bigger if these companions have been your friends all along the road of adventure. But every one of the Drizzt books has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And for that reason. So I think the companions might be a good jump-on spot for a lot of people. But I think a lot of people are going to read this book who maybe are, like you, way behind, and are going to go back and jump on the other ones.
I know I'm definitely doing that, because lots of things tickle my fancy. We'll say that.
Yeah.
So I guess one question I have then is, you've 25 years of writing these books. So how has your, say, your passion, your influence for the characters, how has that changed from when you originally created them to what they are now to you? Like, how has your vision of them changed over time?
Well, my vision or my understanding of what I do has changed. It's continually evolving. When I first started, there was just so much excitement to be writing a book that I couldn't stop writing. And I was running on pure energy back then. And, after a few books, these characters become even more real to you. And you begin to understand their idiosyncrasies, their hidden fears. And you realize that they're hiding things from you. They've got secrets. And so then you're writing just to see what's really going on with them. Good example of that is Catterley from the Cleric Quintet. It took me 3 books to figure out what his problem was. And then I figured out, well, he's a high-level priest who's an agnostic. So that is really bothering him. But it took me 3 books to figure that out. 3 books and reading Richard III. I think it was Richard III I read that kind of sparked, oh yeah, that's what it is.
Well, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, a few years ago, I had to put all the short stories I'd done in the realms together in a compilation called The Legend of Drizzt Collected Stories. And I had to do an annotation at the beginning of each story. What was I thinking when I wrote the story? Why did I write the story? That kind of thing. And as I reread each of the stories, it put me back to exactly where I was emotionally, and just remembered everything that was going on in my life. It was like looking at an old photo album, except I was doing it through my own writing. And that's when it hit me that what writing really is to me is this journey of my life. And these characters have just been friends that have walked the journey with me. And it's not just, this isn't just true with the Dark Elf. I mean, I've got a lot of other series out there. I've got Crimson Shadow, the Spear Wielder's Tales, my Demon Wars world, which I adore. I've got 11 books that I've written in the Demon Wars world. And in fact, I'm running a Kickstarter right now for a role-playing game based on the Demon Wars world and its Gemstone magic system.
Wow.
So I mean, I've been, all of my writing though becomes like that to me, the same as the Dark Elf books, where it becomes part of this journey of my life. It's not a job; it's just something I have to do.
Okay, because there's certain elements in this book that really really caught my eye. I want to do 3 different questions based on like influences behind different things, and I'm going to try not to spoil things, so I'll use the names that you use in the book. So first of all, there's a chapter in this book, or several chapters, that really talk about, we'll go with Spider, and the effects of, say, alcoholism and the effects of the manipulation of the poor and destitute and so on. Did this have any like real world influence based on it, or was it just an idea you had for this character where there were, because you captured alcoholism really well and how people are manipulated really, really well.
Well, I was a bouncer for several years. I paid my way through college as a bouncer in the bar, and you do get to see what alcoholism can do to people's lives when you're at a bar every 3 times a week for years in a row. You watch people deteriorate before your eyes. And yeah, I've known some alcoholics or people addicted to drugs or whatever, and the toll it takes on the kids in the family. I've got friends, obviously, I think everyone does, whose parents were alcoholics. And there are certain things that you see there. It's a painful journey for a lot of people. And, I mean, Spider in the book, honestly, those parts are the most fun for me. I think that's the most adventurous part of the book.
I agree. The Spider storyline was the part that I couldn't put down ever. Anytime I got to one of those chapters, I had to read it because that is the best part. It's the heart and soul of this book.
I think that Spider, the purpose of that character in this book was to reinforce the idea that escapism isn't a bad word, because that is the pure fantasy, rollicking adventure part of the book. And
I agree.
Became my favorite character in the book. Did not expect that at all.
I didn't expect that because in the other books he's not.
Yep.
But in this book, Spider was excellent.
Thank you.
So another one see, another question I have is, one of the characters through most of the book is very, very angsty and bitter and
Bitter.
angry
Not
at
angsty.
deities.
Not angsty. I don't agree with that. He's angry.
Angry.
Totally bitter. Absolutely.
So was there any like major influences from your life with this character, or was it
No.
just the natural direction that he would go?
That character, think about this for a minute. That character was in answer to the people who are going to criticize this book.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense.
Thank you. And that was Reginald.
That
You're talking
definitely
about
makes a
Reginald.
lot of sense.
He agrees.
I guess the last one about influences would be this book, more than some of the others, really delves into the culture and what it means to like the individual people, the characters themselves, and how they have to adapt it and how they have to adapt themselves to new cultures and new aspects of culture. So when it comes to creating like the cultures in these books and how these characters react, how much freedom do you have, and like how much do you draw from your experiences in life versus what the Dungeons and Dragons people kind of tell you to do?
Well, let me answer this in a roundabout way. First of all, the Dungeons and Dragons Wizards of the Coast, they don't tell me to do much. They've come to trust me. And I know the boundaries of the world, so I know what fits. And then, of course, if I'm going off track, they'll say, hey, this really doesn't fit here, but this might fit here or in this place instead. Because the beauty of the Forgotten Realms is it's huge. And it has so many cultures and so many, different societies and orders. That's one of the reasons it's such a pleasure to work in this world, because you can find something to fit your story. But in this case, let me go in a roundabout way. When I was working at 38 Studios, when we first started that company up, and I had to work with this raw and young and fairly inexperienced narrative team, I told them that the way we're going to build a world that makes sense is to know what makes sense in our world. And I tell this to anyone who wants to be a writer: learn history, study culture, study history, study economics, figure out how these societies work together and why they go to war with each other. And whenever I'm writing, even though it's a fantasy world, there are certain principles or truisms about societies that I always put in the books. I mentioned Demon Wars earlier. My Demon Wars story, the Abelican Church in Demon Wars holds a lot of parallels to the Catholic Church in our own world. And I know the history of the Catholic Church. And because I know the history of the Catholic Church, the things I can do in this alternate reality that I'm creating will make sense. And that's one of the most important things to writing fantasy. The person reading your book has to be able to suspend disbelief. And if they've got to deal with all this weirdness in places that should feel familiar, a culture should feel familiar to them. Even if it's Menzoberranzan, even if it's an elf village in the woods, there should be truisms about it that should make logical, consistent sense. If that doesn't happen, they're so off balance trying to suspend disbelief about what you're telling them about the culture that they don't have enough left to suspend disbelief about, dragons breathing fire and magic users throwing lightning bolts and things like that, and undead walking the realms. So the cultures you got to get right. They have to make sense. And you have to do your homework.
So I guess based on that is like, so what sort of things do you do for your homework? Like, for example, for prepping for this book or some of your previous series, what you said you do a lot of reading. So like, what sort of research did you do specifically for this book?
Okay, some of it takes place with the Bedin tribesmen. This is the character you were talking about, I think, most with culture.
Yes.
Okay. Bedin, they're nomadic in the desert. Well, where do you think that came from? The Bedouin.
The Bedouin?
Of course. So I got online and I started studying the Bedouin. And I even used the words that I use, tobe and some of the other words to describe the pieces of clothing. That's Bedouin clothing. Okay.
Oh.
Yeah, I don't just make all of this stuff up. I mean, they should be grounded somewhat in the familiar. And the parents in the book, actually dear friends of mine, Neeraj and Kavita. Neeraj was an animator at 38 Studios, and Kavita is a doctor. I think she's a surgeon, actually. No, she's not a surgeon. But Kavita is a doctor, and Neeraj is an animator. Neeraj became one of my best friends at 38. I love the guy to death. And I said, and now Neeraj is from India. And we would always talk about India, and I would always bust his chops about me teaching him how to dance Bollywood, and he was teaching me how to speak Boston. We would always just go back and forth. But he taught me a lot. And so I tried to bring a little of that influence in to kind of shape the Bedouin just a little bit differently than the Bedouin. You see
I
what I
can
mean?
definitely see that influence.
And like my DemonWars world, let me go back to that again because I had complete control of creating the major cultures in that world. We have the Baronese, south of the Belt and Buckle, and they really are, Middle Eastern and Asian influences in there. And then if you go a little bit west of them, you get to the steppes of Togai, and it's really like Mongolia. And if you go north on the ocean, you get to Alpinador, and that's Norse, but not exactly. I'm just saying that those cultures make sense for those environments.
I see this very clearly now. Thank you.
Sure.
And one reason why I can relate really well to spiders because professionally I'm a social worker, so I work with that sort of issue. And one of the things that really I think caught my eye really early on in that storyline was you have a chapter about a baby being drowned, basically, or attempting to be drowned. Was that for me that was kind of hard to read because it was jarring. Did you have trouble writing that one? Was it hard to capture it right? Because not everyone thinks about drowning babies, and you captured it perfectly.
Great, you're gonna get me banned over half the country. No, a person caught in the throes of addiction will do what he or she needs to do to feed that. And in this case, what he needed was for that kid to not drown.
And if the kid had drowned, it would have been out of his hair, and he would have gotten rid of some of the pain of the loss that had happened just before that.
That's another way to look at it. Yes.
You said you intended this to be your originally your last Forgotten Realms book. So how long ago had you envisioned this book? Was it just the 2006 when you said the 4th edition came out, or do you had intended this to happen a while back?
No, I had the idea for this book around 2006. Not any of the specifics, certainly. I had no idea where it was going to go or if I was going to get to that point. But I had the idea came to me way back then, and then I just figured it would be my denouement, But I'm happy to report there's two Forgotten Realms books coming next year from me, and 2 more the year after. So there's at least 4 more to go. In fact, the next one's already done. It's called Night of the Hunter, and it'll be out in March of next year. So, and I'm about a third of the way through the one that will be out in August of next year. So, it's not my last book. It wasn't, but when I thought of it, I figured it would be my last book. I'm glad it's not because
sort of your walk into the sunset type thing.
Well, I'm glad it didn't turn out that way because I was surprised at how energized this book left me to go on and see what happens. I didn't really expect that.
And so this book is part of, I believe it's called The Sundering, the big Forgotten Realms event.
Yep.
So how does this book relate to the book coming out by Paul S. Kemp, Troy Denning, I believe Aaron Evans, and Richard Lee Byers? Maybe Ed Greenwood, I think, is writing one as well.
Ed Greenwood's writing the last one. The Sundering, you got to think of the Sundering like World War II. Okay, it's this worldwide event that's reshaping the world in a lot of ways. And each of the authors are basically taking their characters in their region and telling the story of the Sundering in their region. So this is the first book of the Sundering series, but the Night of the Hunter that I did that's coming out in March is really the sequel to this book, if you see what I mean.
So the other books are parallel stories that are happening at the same time, while these specific characters will continue in your next book.
Yes. Yes. Except I think Ed Greenwood's book will probably tie up the war, you know? Or not the war, because it's much more than a war, but we'll tie up the Sundering.
So when you wrote the next book that you're talking, did you already know what everyone else was writing in the series, so you know where to move on from there?
Well, I have a general idea of what they're writing, but most of that won't really affect me because I know where the big story's going. But you know, the things that Erin Evans does in her book are going to affect her characters more than my characters. They don't know each other.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So, one of the things you mentioned before, this is just a general thing about Forgotten Realms. You mentioned how big this world is, and in your book, you bounce around a lot. You mentioned a lot of names, and I know one of the things early on is I was going through it, and I had to find a map because I'm like, I don't remember where all these places are anymore.
Yeah.
And so I had to go find the map and so on. And you also bounce around in years. Did you have any difficulty bouncing around locations and in years? Because sometimes you have a chapter that's 6 years ahead of this one, and this one like 3 years behind that one. Did you have any difficulty doing that, or did you have a clear plan and you just wrote it that way?
I have a clear plan, and I have difficulty doing that because it's hard. You got to keep you're juggling a lot of things when you're writing a book like this. But I had the map. I am online constantly when I'm writing. And they have that Forgotten Realms wiki out there, and I'm constantly searching for a town name in the realms or the name of a year. One of the freaky things in the Sundering, by the way, is that you notice how the names of the years made sense?
Yeah.
Those names were created like 20 years ago.
No way.
Oh yeah, I did not make up the names of the years at all. I swear. When we were sitting down and I was plotting out my book, and we started looking at, let's do it this year. And we'd look at the name. We were all just kind of looking at each other going, that can't be. But true story. Sometimes the magic works is the name of a book by Terry Brooks about writing. And yeah, that's a good description of what happened with this. Because the people that came up, I think it was Ed Greenwood and Jeff Grubb, probably. Maybe Jim Lowther. The old Forgotten Realms team at TSR. They came up with these names. Probably mostly Ed. I had nothing to do with that. I didn't even know what they were until we had the meeting for the Sundering. And when I was talking the year, they would tell me the name of the year so I could put it in there because we were really trying to lock down the timeline in the series. And I'd go, 1483, that'd be about right because that's when they would come out. But this would happen here and blah, blah, blah. And they say, that's the year of the blah, 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 blah. And I'd go, okay, that's just weird.
So when you wrote this, you have essentially there's 3 stories that are separate and then they merge in. Did you write each story separately, or did you actually write them in chunks as they are written and you found it easier that way?
I think at one time I skipped 2 of the stories and went to the next chapter for one of the characters. It was Spider.
Of course.
But I only did that once. I generally start at the beginning of the book and write my way through to the end.
Okay. So I guess we're going to begin wrapping up because we're almost out of time. So as you said, the next book, as far as these characters go, will be coming out next spring.
Yep.
You said spring.
March.
And all these other books that are coming out with the Sundering, the next one being The Godborn with Paul S. Kemp, will continue this event, which will lay the foundation for what's happening with D&D next and the Wizards of the Coast. So is there anything you want to say to get people to want to definitely continue on with the Sundering? Any promotional tidbits you want to give us, any teasers or anything like that to, titillate our audience?
Yeah, no, I was there when 4th edition was launched, okay? And in 4th edition, basically, they brought us in, a couple of us came into Gen Con, and they handed us packets, and they said, this is what we're doing to the realms, and you're going to love it. And we read it, and I was like, well, I don't love it. And, there was a lot of back and forth, but really, it wasn't our place to talk, to give a lot of input. I mean, I wrote a big letter about it, but some of my suggestions they took, some they didn't. But with this one, it's different because they called us all in. We were all together, the authors, with the game designers, with the editors, all of us. And they said, here's what we need to do to the game. How will that affect the world? And they let us tell them. And by us, I mean me, Ed Greenwood, Troy Denning. Troy was big in those meetings because he's an old Realms guy. And, you know, I mean, I had said, when they first told me about this, I had said, you should get Troy Denning back because he's an old Realms guy that can really help bring some flavor to this. And they did. And, you know, Aaron and Richard and Paul were there as well, and we just riffed off each other. Gradually, Ed and Troy took it over, which was awesome. And I was really hoping Ed would step up to the front, and he did. It's his world. And the main thing you want with this is you want the flavor of Ed Greenwood back in the Forgotten Realms. And it's there.
I have to agree. This felt a lot more like, you know, his original series or Icewind Dale, you know, back in the day before, say, I got bombarded with Forgotten Realms. Yeah. Sometimes it's really hard to keep up when there's so many books.
Sure, and of course the Forgotten Realms, one of the beauties of the Forgotten Realms initially was that little spots of it were detailed and the rest of it was wide open for your gaming group. And it was huge. And then they shrunk it down and they filled in all the spaces. But here's what typically happens. And this is something I think that a lot of gaming companies experience. When you've got people who are working on a world or a product day after day for weeks, months, years, they get bored. And so they want to go in different directions. They want to do dramatic things. But what they don't understand is the readers aren't getting bored. I mean, some are. Some get, you know, that kind of series fatigue, and they're going to go away. You have to expect that. But the new people coming in came in because of that original flavor of the world. And if you change that too much, you're going away from what worked. So one of the things, this whole D&D Next and the Sundering, I think one of the biggest goals of this is we want people to feel the way they felt when they opened that original gray box set. You know, that feeling of nostalgia, that feeling of freshness in the world. And I have to tell you that when I talk to people who read like every Drizzt book as it comes out, every year they get their new Drizzt book, they tell me that, you know, when I get the new Drizzt book, I feel like it's 1988 again for some of the older readers, you know? And I'm back with my gaming group. And that's a good thing. So we really tried for that in this. We really tried to bring that magic back.
And if this is an example of how the rest of the series is going to be, it started off amazing. Oh. So I fully recommend this book to everyone. I finished it about an hour ago, and it's fantastic. Oh, absolutely fantastic. It will leave you wanting more, which is exactly how you should have a book.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate that. I think most of the people who have read this book think it's among, if not, my best work. I have it right up there with Mortalis from Demon Wars and Homeland from the Dark Elf trilogy as one of them.
I would put it up there, yep. And ironically, you talk about Troy Denning, and he'll be on a show with us next month, so maybe we can bug him about Godborn when he's here. So, very last question because we have to let you go now.
Sure.
Is there anything you'd like to promote, anything else you'd like to promote as far as future projects while you have the audience, while you have, say, the soapbox?
Well, I would love for people to go take a look at Demon Wars Reformation under Kickstarter, because this Kickstarter, I decided to do a Kickstarter. I've been mulling it for about a year. And the way the publishing paradigm has changed and the success of the Dark Elf books, you know, I'm going to keep writing Dark Elf books, but I really want to go back to Demon Wars. And this is the way I can do it. And I just think this game that we came up with is so much fun. So I hope people will go take a look at the Kickstarter and could really use your support, because, I mean, if this works, it buys me that creative freedom in the Demon Wars world that I really want. but it's up to the readers. I mean, Kickstarter is a two-way deal. You got to deliver quality, and you got to have the people willing to take a chance that you're going to do that. So if I have readers out there listening to this, I hope you'll at least go take a look at it.
And I know quite a few listeners who, well, when I told them about this interview, were already freaking out about you being on. So I'm quite sure they'll go over and we'll send as many people as we can over to support your Kickstarter.
Anyone who goes over there and watches the video, pay attention to the shirt I'm wearing. That's my softball team. It's very cool.
Nice. Well, thank you for being on the show, Bob. I hope you have a fantastic day. Remember, folks, the book is The Companions. It is out in stores on Tuesday, that being tomorrow. But when this comes out, it'll be 2 days ago. Go buy it. Go read it. It is fantastic. If you've read any of the Dark Elf books, go back and read this book because it'll make you want to read all the ones you might have missed because it's refreshing. It is great. And you should check out all the rest of the books as they come out. Thank you, sir.
You're very welcome. Thanks for the kind words. I appreciate it.